Hi, my name is Alex Bell, and I will be talking about Malcolm X for my author discussion. He was born Malcolm Little in Omaha, Nebraska on May 19th, 1925. His father, Little Earl, who was an outspoken minister for the Baptist Church, and he was also a well-known supporter of the black nationalist leader, Marcus Garvey, caused him to receive a healthy amount of death threats. His mother, Louise Norton Little, basically stayed at home and take care of the kids. In 1929, Malcolm's family's house was burned to the ground in Lansing, Michigan, and 2 years later his father was found dead on the town's trolley tracks. Those two events were listed as accidents by the police, but we know due to the numerous death threats that his father received that they were murder. After the event occurred, Louise fell into a mental breakdown and was admitted into a mental institution, and the kids were sent to various foster homes and orphanages. Later, he was taken out of foster care by his half-sister and moved to Boston, where he started a spree of petty crimes with Malcolm Shorty Jarvis, his friend. In Boston, Malcolm and Shorty were arrested on accounts of burglary, and they were sentenced to 10 years in prison. Malcolm was paroled after 7 years. In jail, Malcolm used the time to work on his education and pursue a path of self-enlightenment due to the Muslim faith. After he was released from prison, Malcolm became a member of the Nation of Islam and started to follow the teachings of Elijah Muhammad. He was taught how white people actively work to keep African Americans from ever empowering themselves. Malcolm X became the Nation of Islam's national spokesman and a minister, where he helped grow the membership from 500 to 30,000 between 1952 and 1963. In 1963, Malcolm X discovered that Elijah Muhammad had been breaking the Islam moral code and sleeping with 6 of his secretaries, and even having children with some of them. That devastated Malcolm X and pushed him away from Muhammad, eventually causing a breakup between the two, causing him to basically stop believing what Elijah Muhammad was teaching. On February 21st, 1965, Malcolm X was giving a speech in Manhattan when multiple people rushed the stage and began shooting their guns, one of which ended up killing him. For the autobiography of Malcolm X, it covers the way his life and his changes that his life went through on 3 big things: racism, religion, and how his view on education changed after he dropped out of middle school. A quote I found from the book that I think goes well with his change in racism. He starts by believing most whites never feel that Negroes can contribute anything to other areas of thought and ideas. You just notice how rarely you will ever hear whites asking Negroes what they think about the problem of world health or the space race to land a man on the moon. And that's on page 586 in the book. I believe here this shows what his view on what at the beginning of his life was, when he was encouraging all the violent protests and all that, and then how it changed towards at the end of his life after he went on Mecca to having a view that they can eventually work together. His religion changed from that he grew up in a family of Baptists to becoming Muslim and becoming a part of the Nation of Islam for a really long time. And then, to quote his view on education, since he dropped out in middle school, he later said his greatest lack is that he believes that he doesn't have the kind of education that he should have been able to get. So the difference between nonviolent method of activism, which MLK used, and the violent method of activism that Malcolm X used, because Malcolm X believed that violent protests were the answer, while Martin Luther King used Gandhi's method of nonviolent protests. Malcolm X had believed that white people were evil people, and that violence was the only way to extinguish the evil. The nonviolent approach believed that if there was violence, then the tension would continue to escalate, and nothing would become accomplished, and that matters would only get worse. Throughout the civil rights movement, both methods had a great number of supporters, causing them to be very popular and have the result be a mixture of both of them. He criticized the belief for Malcolm X's activism. He criticized the belief of MLK in peaceful protests and said that racial integration was not the answer, because he believed that all African Americans should return to Africa, where they were forcibly taken during the slave trade. He encourages people to defend themselves by any means necessary, often referring to violence as the answer, which is why he's been very linked to violent protests and that, because if things started going haywire at the protests, he was a big fan of defending yourself and not just sitting there and getting taken to jail. But after he went on Mecca in 1964, he changed his view that all white people were inherently bad, and he began to hold hope for an integrated future, which was right around the time the March on Washington when MLK gave his speech, and that the fact that his views changed basically aided the movement. And here's my works cited page, and that'll be all for this discussion. Thank you.